Next up in our ACC preview is the Duke Blue Devils. And Dalton, Mike Elko did an excellent job turning around Duke over his 2 years as head coach. They went 17-9 over the last 2 seasons. The 2 years before, they went 5-18. The problem is, though, Mike Elko, because of how great of a job he did at Duke, he is now the Texas A&M head coach. So now Duke turns to Manny Diaz, former Penn State defensive coordinator, as their next head coach. He brings with him a very aggressive defensive philosophy. In fact, the Nittany Lions last year blitzed at the third highest rate in the country, right around 58%. And if you're going to do that, Dawn, if you're going to blitz at such a high rate, you need a good secondary behind you. And I think that the Blue Devils have that this year.
Yeah, and Elko did a great job building the whole defense, but they were a really, really underrated coverage unit last season. They lost a few pieces, but when you talk about guys like Chandler Rivers being an incumbent corner there and a Rice transfer and Trayshawn Devonis, who's really, really good, it's a good secondary for Diaz to start with. And, even if he doesn't have an individual pass rusher like Elko had with an Aeneas Peebles, right, all that blitzing, you can get creative, you can run some stunts, you can do a lot of different things to create a pass rush, especially at the college level. So, Diaz has got a good foundation to work with in the secondary while he finds the front seven and he finds some offense.
Absolutely. Now, the biggest weakness is kind of a generic one, but it's a brand new roster, man. They have so many new faces on this team right now. Not only a new coach roaming the sidelines, but also 14 of the 31 players who played 300 snaps last year are still with the program. 17 of them are gone. So you lose most of your players who played last year, whether it be to the NFL draft, like Graham Barton, whether it be to the transfer portal, like Riley Leonard, your star quarterback. But Dalton, tell me more about the new quarterback for Duke right now, the transfer Maalik Murphy coming in from Texas.
Yeah, he's a guy when Quinn Ewers got hurt last year at Texas who made a couple of huge starts and got especially a huge win against Kansas State in overtime. But he's a guy who can make quick decisions. I think Steve Sarkisian did a really nice job last year of, kind of taking all of the reads and everything out of his hands, right? Just one read, RPO, quick things like that. But the one thing with Murphy, he's got to keep the turnover-worthy plays down, and the game looked a little fast for him at times, just a 42.6 grade when he was blitzed, and teams just, when they saw him, they decided to blitz a whole lot. So teams are going to come after him. They're going to speed up the game on him. He doesn't, at least from what we saw in his first 2 starts, he doesn't have too much improv to his game. He's definitely more of a pocket quarterback who maybe can move around and be functional, with his mobility. But I think that's the biggest thing I'm looking for is just be fundamentally sound. Don't turn the ball over. And when the blitz is on and the heat is on, what does your decision making look like? Because that's one thing we saw in the second half of that Kansas State game. They really turned the heat up and got themselves back into the game by forcing Murphy into bad decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. So one guy he's going to really rely on this year is his receiver in Jordan Moore. And I mentioned before, Duke lost a lot to the transfer portal, but they did return their top receiver in Jordan Moore. Really good shiftiness, 6 feet tall, 195 pounds. Really leaves defenders in his wake as a route runner, man. He's a really, really good route runner. I also had 11 contested catches last year, which tied for second among the ACC receivers last season. Also moved the chains on 42 of his catches, which was third in the ACC. So he's a really reliable receiver, good route runner who could also go up and get it despite not being the biggest receiver as well. So I like Jordan Moore a lot, man. I think he's one of the more underrated receivers that we probably have in the ACC right now.
He certainly is, and he goes up against a guy every day in practice who can make him better, and Chandler Rivers out there at corner. The 10th highest graded corner in the ACC last year, the 5th highest graded corner in zone coverage. He's not the best athlete in the world, but he's a really heady player who uses his eyes well in coverage. And, we talked about Manny Diaz with the blitzing. It doesn't always mean you have to zero blitz, right? He can come up with any sort of zone blitz he can find. You have to create things that are suited for your player's strengths, right? And Rivers' strength is in zone coverage. This was a really, really good zone coverage team under Mike Elko. And I have to think with a guy like Rivers on the back end that Diaz would keep some of those principles in. But again, a player as talented as this, it's a really good place to start. When you're able to cover on the back end, you can get more creative in the front end, and Rivers is the start of that.
Absolutely. So, Dawn, brand new head coach for Duke, a lot of new pieces on this roster. Do you think they'll find similar success to what they had under Elko, or do you think we're going to see a step back from the Blue Devils this year?
I think it's going to take at least a year. I do. I think Diaz can piece something together defensively, but I'm very worried about this offense, right? You lost Riley Leonard, and Murphy is certainly a step down from that. You lost your leading rusher. You lost your best receiver in Jalen Calhoun. There's just a lot missing here from an offense that was already kind of more decent than elite for sure, especially after Riley Leonard's injury last year. They really struggled to score in the second half of last year, and they've only lost more pieces from that team, not to mention their best offensive lineman, Graham Barton, in the first round of the draft. So there's a lot to rebuild here on offense. I think it's going to take another year before they get back into bowl contention.
Yeah, I'm looking at the schedule right now. It's an average ACC schedule. I think they can start off hot for sure. I mean, they play Elon, Northwestern, UConn, and Middle Tennessee. That's their first 4 games. So they can start off 4-0. But then you play, North Carolina, Georgia Tech, Florida State, SMU, Miami, NC State, Virginia Tech, and then Wake Forest to close out the year. So, I mean, I think they could beat Wake Forest. That's 5 wins right there. But then you got to beat a pretty good ACC team in order to get to that coveted 6th win and make a bowl game. It's going to be tough for Duke this year. I think that line of 5.5 wins that you see from FanDuel makes a lot of sense. I think a bowl game is certainly possible for Duke. I think they certainly can surprise one of these ACC teams. But and especially with that easy first 4 games, they could definitely get to a bowl game. But they're going to have to surprise somebody in order to do that. And I think it's possible, but I do expect a slight step back from Manny Diaz in his first year as head coach. That's what we got for our preview of the Duke Blue Devils. Hey, thanks for watching the PFF College Football Show. Before I let you go, though, we have an unbelievable deal for you guys right now. If you use the code CFB25, you get 25% off your PFF Plus annual subscription. We've got the 2024 College Football Preview Guide that you can find over at pff.com, featuring the best players in the country from all 70 Power 5 teams, plus 10 Group of 5 teams that have the best chance at making the college football playoff as well. You can also gain access to NCAA premium stats for historical games, teams, and player tracking dating all the way back to 2014, so the last decade or so of college football. All the stats you can hope for, you can find in PFF Premium as well. Also, you can be the GM of your favorite NFL team with our unbelievable mock draft simulator, where you can draft up to 7 rounds of players for your NFL team. And if you want to dominate your fantasy league, you can do that as well using the best fantasy tools on the planet. All of that and more with your PFF Plus annual subscription, which you can find for 25% off right now with the code you can find in the description. Or if you want to go to subscribe.pff.com and use the code CFB25 at checkout. Again, you get 25% off your PFF Plus subscription. This won't last forever, so make sure you take advantage of it right now.